Okay, did anyone else notice this really weird line in Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny?
It's not yours. You stole it.
Then you stole it.
And then I stole it. It's called capitalism. The bid is 160.
And this is not an isolated example. You know, more and more movies seem to be winking to us, the audience, and letting us know that they get it.
Look into the clear center of this glass onion. Miles Braun is an idiot.
And it might feel good to be seen by Hollywood. But I'm starting to wonder, are they just selling our political values back to us in a way that validates our beliefs while they continue making tons of money?
You've stolen hundreds of millions from people who've done nothing but work hard all their lives.
Now, Mark Fisher wrote that films have the ability to perform our anti-capitalism for us, allowing us to continue to consume with impunity. You know, in this way we get a political version of the sitcom laugh track. That's where canned laughter allows us to just sit there in silence as the studio audience laughs for us. And we see this all over the recent canon of Eat the Rich films, like the Knives Out series.
So she bumps him off for the inheritance? Come on, no, have you seen her Insta? She's an influencer.
Triangle of Sadness.
You're all equal. That is so true. Everyone's equal.
Saltburn.
Oliver, I have a complete and utter horror of ugliness. Ever since I was very young. I don't know why.
Because you're a terrible person.
Even Barbie gets in on this action.
You set the feminist movement back 50 years. You destroy girls' innate sense of worth, and you are killing the planet with your glorification of rampant consumerism.
And while these movies are all critical of the rich, they feature wealthy characters that are pretty one-dimensional. You know, they're either idiots who just sort of lucked into money, or evil monsters who would use all the child labor in the world gladly if it got them more jets and cars and fancy wine. Now, the working class characters in these movies don't really fare much better. They're often portrayed as helpless victims and moral angels, or in some cases, just resentful sociopaths. Now, these movies and their critiques of capitalism might make us feel proud of our correct politics. But we have to ask, what's behind this new radical Hollywood and who's benefiting from it, right? Why do billionaires and their studios want to make movies critiquing billionaires and their studios? One of my favorite satirists, Chris Morris, said this about the trend.
The problem is that I think we've got used to a kind of satire which essentially placates the court. You do a nice dissection of the way things are in the orthodox elite, and lo and behold, you get slapped on the back by the orthodox elite who say, jolly good, can you do us another one?
In other words, when we watch movies about capitalism being bad, it actually demotivates us to change anything about our world. So we might then want to ask, are these films doing more harm than good? Now, I don't want that to be true. I don't know what you think, but I really want to believe that popular art can be politically valuable. But in this case, I do see how this type of anti-capitalist sentiment is so easily co-opted to create profitable content for major studios. So today, I want to try to make sense of it by looking at why so many of these films get it wrong. And to do so, we're gonna look at a movie that gets it right, or at least less wrong than the others, The Menu. Now, before we get cooking, I do wanna say, welcome to Wisecrack 2. My name is Michael. I'm glad you're here. Now, if you are a regular viewer of Wisecrack, thank you so much for joining us over here. This is your first time seeing one of our videos. It's so good to meet you. Now, this is our new channel where we're gonna focus on analyzing films, TV, and games, trying to see how they can help us understand the world better and still using all the tools of philosophy that you all know and love. Now, if you've never seen our main channel, Wisecrack, please check it out. We release weekly videos that use philosophy and critical theory to make sense of all types of cultural, social, and political trends. Okay, so let's talk about The Menu, and fair warning, we're gonna spoil the movie. Now, right off the bat, we're introduced to a character who seems like the quintessential insufferable rich guy.
Babe, please don't smoke, it'll kill your palate.
Tyler strolls into the restaurant and can't help but stunt on the staff with his knowledge.
Do you make that with a pot code yet?
You know, desperate to be seen as an insider, he makes sure that the cooks know that he knows about the hyper-specific gear they're using. Now, while you could take this as a show of respect, it's not. He's actually fetishizing a commodity that he's never done the labor of producing himself. And commodity fetishism describes what happens when we ascribe value to a thing and not the human relations that, made the thing. Basically, he's wholly focused on the cultural value of Chef Slowik's fine dining cuisine, ascribing the value to the food itself and the gadgets that produce it more so than the incidental human labor that goes into it. Sort of like how one values a supreme tea, not for the hands that made it, but the exclusivity of the brand itself. Now for Tyler, the production of this food and the hands involved in that production are negligible. He's sort of like an excited little boy when the cook knows his name, but he doesn't even consider returning the favor.
He knew my name, babe.
Yeah, I noticed you didn't ask his name.
Yeah, well,
The cook's not valuable to Tyler because of his humanity. He's valuable for his proximity to a particular cultural fetish. In this case, the food at a famous restaurant. This fetishization and the belief that consuming and understanding high-end food makes him cultured have actually undermined the value of his obsession.
You are why the mystery has been drained from our art. You see that now, don't you?
Because for all of Tyler's high-end consumption and associated expertise, when he's forced to enact that knowledge and actually cook, he just totally falls apart. While that's not the point of the movie, I do think you should know how to cook 3 things. So if you don't know how to cook, learn how to cook 3 things. If you don't know what, ask in the comments and let people give you suggestions. I would say omelet, simple pasta sauce, and I don't know, a seared piece of fish. I think if you do that, you can go a lot of places from there. But don't do it how he did it, because he dies. He can't mediate between the worlds of cultural fetishization and material production. And he's made painfully aware of the unbridgeable gap between his cultural understanding of food and the actual labor of creating it. His bourgeois pleasure of consumption is irrelevant when it comes to the more proletarian act of production. He seems to understand this and sort of accept the punishment foisted upon him by Chef. We can see this more clearly by comparing Tyler to another one of my favorite on-screen rich bros, my buddy Shane from season 1 of The White Lotus. Like Tyler, Shane sees the consumption of luxury as essential to his character. We see this when he absolutely freaks out when a logistical mix-up prevents him from staying in his desired hotel room.
The guy lied. That or he's just stupid or something. We did book the room with the pool, and we paid for it. My mom forwarded me the booking.
Just as enjoying dips with no bread confirms Tyler's status, being denied the room with the plunge pool seems to threaten Shane's. They're also both with women who they seem to value primarily as eye candy that enhances their own status even as they treat them like shit. But the differences are telling. Tyler willfully takes his own life when his disconnect with the labor behind his fetish is revealed, and he can't stomach the disdain of the chef he idolizes. On the other hand, Shane gets away with killing the hotel manager and still gets to keep his wife after treating her like absolute ass. Now, I don't know what you guys think, but personally, I don't really find either of these characters relatable or even realistic. Please let me know in the comments if you find one of these characters relatable, because if so, I would love for you to be a benefactor of our channel. Now, Shane represents a flattened and cynical version of the rich guy archetype. One who acts like just an absolute asshole and then fully gets away with it. His underlying psychology seems to boil down to something like, I'm rich, bitch! But with Tyler, we get a deeper look into the psyche of a person whose entire understanding of the world is mediated by capitalism, in which to desire something means you must necessarily acquire that thing. The sort of practice of cultural appreciation turns into reckless consumption. Like if you appreciate art, you gotta buy a Rothko at auction. Also, if you have the money to buy a Rothko at auction, again, hit us up. We would love for you to be a benefactor. In this way, some of us might be more like Tyler than we like to admit. If you don't think that makes sense, just work with me for a second, Because being obsessed with food is a defining millennial trait. Maybe because, dinner at a hip new restaurant is way more feasible than a mortgage on a hip new condo. But, how many foodies out there are aware of the stark difference between the conditions in which their meals are served and the conditions in which they are produced? Okay, so for example, most of us don't take the bus home with the line cooks to see where they live. We're about as disconnected from this stuff as someone like Tyler is. Now, a lot more to say here, but real quick, if this is your first time here, please do subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so you know when new videos are coming out. like it, leave comments, all that sort of stuff. And if you love movies, thinking about them and talking about them, please check out our movie podcast, Show Me the Meaning. It streams right here every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Pacific. The podcast is available later in the week. If you like this, you'll definitely like that. Okay, I want to consider another type of character that always shows up in these sorts of movies, what I'd call the smug finance bro. Shout out to any smug finance bros who are watching.
Work and money. Yeah, baby. Yeah, baby.
We're pathetic, aren't we?
Oh my God, dude. Somebody shoot us.
Now, they might seem like total parodies, but hints of their humanity actually peek through the surface.
Me and Amanda are not good. It's not good.
Your fault?
No, it was her fault. She made me text her coworker. Yeah, of course it's my fault, bro.
These are guys who seem fully subsumed by the logic of capital. You know, while Tyler thinks he's a gourmand with an aesthetic appreciation for fine dining, these dudes, I guess to their credit, harbor no such self-delusion. You know, cash rules everything around them. Tyler thinks his good taste makes him more than just a rich guy, but these dudes know that they are nothing more than rich guys, which makes them funny to watch until it stops being funny.
Fuck it. I'm gonna break this fucking window.
We see them, you know, only understand the world via economic relations. They can't conceive of an alternate motive for anyone's actions. That's why they assume that you can buy your way out of being murdered.
Just say a fucking number, man!
And honestly, you guys probably feel this, I felt it, you know, it's hard to feel too much sympathy for these dudes. They've gotten rich doing financial crimes, and they basically treat everyone else like a bunch of NPCs in their art of the deal lifestyle. But they've, you know, also been dehumanized via their own type of alienation. Now, typically, alienation, as popularized by Marx, describes how industrial labor sucks the humanity out of workers. You know, they're alienated from the products of their labor, which are sold for someone else's profit, from their fellow workers, who they're forced to compete with, and even from their own humanity. Their existence is reduced to workers whose living conditions are just enough to keep them alive. Now, for many of us, this might look like working a 10-hour day at our main job while doing a bunch of side hustles to make rent, leaving us with little time to develop as people or explore our hobbies, hang out with friends, fall in love, things of that nature. But the same system creating this alienation also dehumanizes those on the winning side, you know, the stock traders and CEOs of the world. Now, if you're thinking, Michael, are you about to look me dead in the eye and tell me to have empathy for stock traders and CEOs? Kind of, but not really. So don't click away yet. Now, they're disconnected from the human cost of their wealth. They don't see the relationship between quarterly earnings or reductions in spending and human beings. And you don't have to be a millionaire to be affected by this type of alienation. You know, we're usually unaware of the labor conditions that create our phones, much less the lives of the workers who make them. And when we order Thai food on DoorDash, all we know is that in 37 minutes, a bag of pad Thai is gonna magically appear on our doorstep. Again, this video is brought to you by DoorDash. Hashtag, we don't use them humans. This isn't really a moral issue. You know, you're not being a bad person when you order delivery. You're simply participating in a fundamentally exploitative and alienating system. But it's worth noting that Marx builds his theory of alienation off of Hegel's master and servant dialectic. This is a big idea. You don't gotta know a lot, but this is where Hegel notes that it's not just a servant that's dehumanized via a master who's appropriating their labor. You know, the master also suffers in as much as they're totally disconnected from labor. I mean, if you grew up with like a super rich dad, shout it out if you did, you know, maybe there was a time where like something broke and your super rich dad had to pay someone to come fix the thing, and the working class person knew so much more than your super rich dad that it like negatively affected your super rich dad, and he drank a lot more scotch that night and you didn't see him for 2 days, and mom started going to tennis lessons a lot more, and then everything else fell apart from there. Basically, I'm saying that like Hegel described cuck theory for the first time. Now, while the servant's life does largely suck, they do get to see their consciousness reflected back at them in their labor, which helps them develop their own humanity. If that sounds a little unclear, you know, imagine you go to a pottery class and you create a thing and you put some effort into it, and you bring it home, you put it on the table, and your roommate says, hey, it's pretty cool. Every time you walk by that, you might think like, hey, I'm not a total worthless piece of shit. I made a cool bowl that people like. You know, you see your creative consciousness staring back at you in an object that you've made. Now, in Hegel's example, the master, in having others carry out labor for them, doesn't get to see their consciousness reflected back at them. And because of that, they don't really develop their humanity in the same way. As Hegel sees it, this relationship to labor is fundamental in cultivating both our humanity and our ethical relations to others. Honestly, guys, you just learned as much about Hegel in the last minute and a half than many will learn in a whole semester, so good for you. To put it in a mellow way, every time that you drop your laundry off for someone else to clean, you're slowly destroying your own soul. This is why films that associate the behavior of the rich with an individual lack of morality are missing the point. Because when we focus on the moral corruption of individuals, we then ignore the economic and social conditions that create these exploitative relations. It's turning a structural issue into an individual one. Now, this is why Slavoj Žižek says, I don't like this moralization that comes with these movies. You know, we are full of anti-capitalism today, maybe even too much, but they always focus on personal corruption, greed. We should move from this simple moralistic anti-capitalism to more fundamental questions such as why people are pushed to act like that. We see this sort of like personal corruption in a movie like The Glass Onion.
Anywhere you go, it's gonna be your word against mine. How do you think that's gonna go?
Because cartoonishly evil rich guys make it way easier for us to watch the movie and just think like, wow, I could never be that depraved. I'm one of the good ones, even if I just got a huge raise.
And that place is the crown jewel of my kingdom. I'm not gonna let some crash test dummy with a gun fuck it up. Is that clear, Mr. Pettis?
But while these rich guys are heightened for satirical purposes, our friends in the menu aren't really that far removed from a group of MBA students who are eating sushi somewhere in Boston right now.
My dad used to say that you buy the experience.
You know, unlike the born evil rich guys from other films, feels like for these dudes, their souls have just been slowly eroded by the system.
You guys ever get burnt out or?
But hey, enough talking about rich dudes. Let's look at how these films talk about actual working class characters. Okay, before we do though, I need some fuel, which is a delicious sip of coffee from Wisecrack's official coffee partner, Yes Please Coffee. They are a small roaster based right here in Los Angeles. They're run by 4 individuals. They're fully independent, and they just make really, really delicious coffee. If you order some of their beans with the code Wisecrack, there's a link in the description, you get 20% off your first order. So, you know, if you want to have the sort of high-end taste for culinary delights we see in the movie without being a psychopath, maybe just treat yourself to some really delicious coffee at an affordable price. Again, that's Yes Please Coffee. Get 20% off with the code Wisecrack. Now let's get back to it. One of the biggest problems in Eat the Rich movies is that poor and working class characters can be represented in uncomplicated ways. They're either downtrodden victims with an inherent sense of morality.
It's a physical thing that just the thought of lying, yeah, it makes me puke.
Or resentful monsters thirsty for power.
It's mine. All of this? Yes.
Now, while the kitchen staff in the menu does represent the working class more broadly, the film focuses on 2 characters in particular. You have Chef Slowick and then Margot, who's a sex worker and Tyler's date for the evening. Now, they're both valued, even if tenuously, by the wealthy. In the case of Chef Slowick, elite magazines write about him. CEOs invest in him. The rich travel to an isolated island just to eat his food. In the case of Margot, her coolness and sex appeal compel men to spend lots of money to share her company. But see, this value is contingent on the taste and desires of the rich, who have notoriously fickle stomachs and libidos. I mean, look at how Tyler speaks to Margot.
I can, because ding dong, I'm the one who's paying, so maybe shut up and eat.
And let's not forget, he brought her on this date knowing that the final course was death.
So you brought Margot? Mm-hmm. Why?
It's just because you don't offer seating for one.
So you hired her knowing she'd die?
Yes.
I mean, listen, I know that you've been on bad dates, but at least you've never been on a date where the person knew that you were gonna die at the end of it, but we would love, bad date stories, so let us know if you got them. And Chef Slowik knows that he's basically owned.
I would have to say that Doug Verrick owns me, except now things are a little more complicated, and I own Doug Verrick.
In both cases, we have people whose work, in Slowik's case, his food, and in Margot's case, her sexuality, are products for a class they don't belong to. Neither of them could afford their own services. Yeah, I know in Margot's case, that would be particularly complicated, but you get the point. And this commodification and alienation sucks the joy out of their respective crafts.
I haven't desired to cook for someone in ages.
We see the same thing for Margot.
What rattled me is that he told me to tell him that he was a good man and that I was his daughter and that he loved me and I loved him.
While they've both been exploited by specific rich individuals, what's really broken them is economic relations under capitalism. They're not alienated from the joys and pleasures of food and sex because of rich diners and horny nerds. They're alienated because they exist in a system predicated on the exchange of labor as a means of human survival. Contrast this with Zoe Kravitz's directorial debut, Blink Twice, where a working class person is morally wronged by an upper class person. Now in the film, the real issue is a rich person and their hanger-on's lack of morality, not the fact that their wealth structurally affords them the ability to abuse working class people with impunity. This centers personal responsibility rather than structural inequality. The film's ending is framed as happy because the virtuous protagonist is now the one endowed with money and power. This suggests that the hyper-concentration of wealth is not inherently a structural problem, but rather that its moral implications depend on an individual's character. Like we've been saying throughout this video, it's the difference between watching one of these movies and being like, damn, rich people are bad, and watching one of these movies and being like, hey, there's a set of structural conditions in our society that mean that rich people can develop their subjectivity in a certain way that they exploit other people with impunity, while those people are systemically sort of alienated from their humanity. Now in the menu, both Slowik and Margot get to see their bosses die.
Under he goes,
And while it offers a momentary sense of freedom, it's not enough to stop Slowik from burning it all to the ground. Now, unlike Saltburn, a film where a middle-class character murders a rich family to inherit their wealth, which paints the middle class as ultimately resentful and lustful of the upper class. Now, Slowik doesn't kill his boss as some scheme to steal his wealth. Rather, Slowik and his staff are aware that nothing can fix the system. No act of individual vengeance can disalienate them. No evil scheme can restore their fundamental humanity. The contradictions of the system are just too big to be resolved. And in an act that we could say is at least kind of akin to self-immolation, Slowik and his staff burn themselves to the ground along with the human s'mores as an act of symbolic protest against the system. Only Margot avoids getting s'mored, instead enjoys dinner and a show from the comfort of a boat. But the thing is, this doesn't mean that she has a happy ending. She's not going to return to the shore and find a new world which prioritizes humanity over profit. What she does get is a cheeseburger, which represents a rare moment of disalienation. Without the economic pressures of fine dining, Chef Slowik was able to create something that connected him to a time where he loved cooking. It's like the one thing he makes in this movie that you feel like you put love into. And Margot gets to enjoy something that was made with that love and care. And as I read the film, it seems like this burger takes her back to a more innocent time, before she was eating expensive meals that she doesn't like, paid for by weird men who seem like horrible fathers. And just like how consuming the perfect cheeseburger isn't going to create revolutionary change for Margot, passively consuming Eat the Rich movies isn't going to create revolutionary change for us. Maybe the point is that the better films in this genre at least help us break out of that illusion. Thanks for watching, guys. We'll see you next time.